The lie your bank wants you to believe about money. You're staring at your bank account right now, aren't you? And that number probably isn't making you feel very good. Maybe you're 45 years old. You've got 15, maybe 20 years left before you're supposed to retire, and you're looking at a balance that's nowhere near what you thought you'd have by this point in your life. Or maybe you're in your early 50s, and you're starting to get that sick feeling in your stomach when you think about what happens when you stop working. You've done everything right, or at least you thought you did. You showed up to work, you paid your bills, you raised your family. But somewhere along the way, building real wealth got left behind. And now you're wondering if it's even possible to catch up. Here's what I want to tell you right off the bat, and I need you to really hear this because it's going to change how you think about the next decade of your life. It's not too late, not even close. In fact, if you're in your 40s or early 50s right now, you have a major advantage that most younger people don't have. You've got income. You've probably got stability. You know how to work hard and stick to something. What you might not have is a strategy that actually works. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. My name is Clarence, and I spend an embarrassing amount of time thinking about money and why people in their 40s and 50s feel like they've somehow fallen behind when they're actually sitting on some of the biggest wealth-building years of their entire life. See, there's this narrative out there that says if you didn't start investing when you were 25, if you didn't build your first $100,000 in your 20s or early 30s, then you've basically blown it. You're too old now. The math doesn't work. You're destined to work until you're 70. That's not just wrong, it's dangerously wrong, because it stops people from even trying. And if you're the kind of person who doesn't give up easily, if you're someone who's willing to learn and take action, then you're about to discover that your 40s and 50s might actually be your biggest money-making years yet. The difference is that you need to know exactly what to do, and more importantly, you need to understand why it works. Because building wealth isn't some magic trick that only works for rich people. It's actually a system. And once you understand the system, once you know the rules of the game, you can compress what normally takes 30 years into maybe 5 or 10, if you're willing to be strategic about it. Let me paint you a picture of where most people in their 40s find themselves right now. You've got a decent job. Maybe you make $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year. Or if you're really doing well, you're hitting 6 figures. You're probably paying a mortgage. Your kids might be in college or heading there soon, which is expensive as hell. You've got car payments. You've got insurance. You've got all the things that come with being a responsible adult in your midlife years. And after you pay all of that, after you cover your living expenses and your responsibilities, there's not much left over at the end of the month. Maybe a couple $100, maybe nothing. Maybe you're actually dipping into credit cards every now and then when unexpected stuff comes up, which it always does. This is the trap that most people find themselves in during their 40s, and it feels completely hopeless. It feels like building any kind of real wealth is impossible because you're already stretched so thin. You don't have the luxury of living on ramen noodles and rice like you might have when you were younger. You've got responsibilities. You've got standards. You've got a life that costs money to maintain. But here's the thing that most financial advice misses completely. Building your first $100,000 when you're in your 40s is actually a completely different game than building it when you're in your 20s. And in some ways, it's way easier. See, when you're in your 20s, you're trying to build wealth on an entry-level salary while competing with people who have trust funds and family money and every other advantage. You're also trying to figure out your career, so your income is probably all over the place. Maybe it's growing, maybe it's stagnant, maybe you're jumping between jobs trying to find something better. Your life is unstable. Your income is unstable. Your priorities are unstable. You're basically trying to build a house on quicksand. But when you're in your 40s, you've got advantages that 25-year-old you didn't have. Your income is probably more stable. You know what you're doing at work. You've probably had some promotions. You might have multiple income streams at this point, or at least you understand how to create them. Your life is more settled in some ways, even if it's complicated in others. You don't need to prove anything to yourself anymore. You don't need the fancy car or the big house to feel like you've made it. Most importantly, you've got focus. When you were younger, you were distracted by 1,000 different things. Now you know what matters. You know what you want. If what you want is financial security and freedom from money stress, then you've got a huge advantage. The first thing you need to understand about saving your first $100,000 in your 40s is that it's not really about the money. I know that sounds weird, but stick with me. It's not about having $100,000 sitting in the bank. It's about the psychological shift that happens when you actually have it. Once you hit that number, something fundamental changes in how you think about money. The scarcity mindset that's been running your life starts to fade away. Instead of thinking about survival, you start thinking about growth. Instead of wondering how you're going to make it to next month, you start wondering how you're going to accelerate your wealth. That shift is worth way more than the $100,000 itself. But before we get to that, we need to talk about the actual mechanics of how you get there. Because it's not going to happen by accident, and it's not going to happen if you try to do it the way you probably think you need to do it. Here's what most people think they need to do to build wealth. They think they need to cut their budget down to almost nothing. They think they need to move into a cheaper apartment or house. They think they need to stop going out to eat. They think they need to skip vacations and stop buying things they enjoy. Essentially, they think they need to make their life smaller so they can save more money. And that approach might work if you're in your 20s and you're willing to suffer for a few years to get ahead. But if you're in your 40s, that approach is usually a recipe for failure because you don't have the same capacity to suffer. You're tired. You've already done the suffering thing. You raised kids. You dealt with career stress. You've been through enough that you don't want to spend your 40s living like a college student. You want your life to feel good. You want to enjoy yourself. And here's the good news. You don't have to sacrifice everything to build your first $100,000. There's a completely different strategy that works better for people in your life stage. And it's based on expanding what you're bringing in rather than shrinking what you're spending. This is where it gets interesting, because this is where your age actually becomes an advantage. See, when you're in your 40s, you've usually got skills. You've got experience. You've got a network of people who know you and trust you. These are things that younger people simply don't have, and they're worth a lot of money. The question is, are you using them? Most people in their 40s are not. They've got one income stream, which is their job, and they treat it like it's the only way they can make money. But that's not actually how money works. Money is attracted to value. And if you've got more value to offer than you're currently being paid for, then you're literally leaving money on the table every single day. This could be freelance work in your field. This could be consulting. This could be a side business that you run in the evenings and weekends. This could be teaching or mentoring other people in your industry. The specific thing doesn't matter as much as understanding that you probably have the ability to earn significantly more money than you're currently earning, and you're just not doing it. Let's talk about some real numbers here, because this is where it stops being theoretical and starts being practical. Let's say you're making $80,000 a year at your job. That's a solid middle-class income. It's not bad. But let's say you could find a way to bring in an extra $15,000 per year from some kind of side income. That could be freelance work. That could be a little online business. That could be consulting for companies in your field. That's not that hard to do if you actually decide to do it. $15,000 per year extra. Now, here's where it gets interesting. If you take that $15,000 and you invest it instead of spending it, if you set up an automatic transfer so that money goes into an investment account and you never see it in your checking account, something magical starts to happen. You don't notice that money in your daily life. You're still living on your $80,000 salary just like you were before. Your life doesn't get smaller. You don't feel like you're suffering or sacrificing. But you're also investing $15,000 per year, and that money starts to compound. Let's say you do this for 5 years. That's $75,000 that you've contributed. But if that money is invested in something that's earning an average of 8% per year, which is pretty conservative for stock market investments, you're looking at close to $85,000 after 5 years. Not bad. You're almost to your $100,000 with just that one strategy. But most people don't stop there if they actually see results. Once they see that their money is growing, once they see that they don't even miss that income because they never had it in the first place, they usually find ways to earn more. Maybe that first year it was hard to find $15,000 in extra income, but by year 3, once you've built your little side business or your freelance practice, you're probably making $20,000 or $25,000 extra. So now you're investing more. Now your compounding is working even faster. By year 5 or 6, you could easily be at $100,000 without having made any major sacrifices in your lifestyle. You didn't have to move. You didn't have to cut your budget. You didn't have to give up the things you enjoy. You just did something smarter with your time and your skills. But here's the thing that most people don't realize about building wealth this way. It's not actually about the money. Well, it is, but it's also not. What's happening is that you're developing a completely different relationship with the concept of income. Instead of thinking of yourself as a person with a job, you start thinking of yourself as a person with multiple streams of income. Instead of thinking that the only way to make money is to show up at an office and do what someone else tells you to do, you start understanding that you have value that you can sell in different ways. That's a fundamental shift in how you see the world, and it changes everything about your financial future. Because once you understand that you can create income from your own skills and knowledge, it becomes almost impossible to stay poor. You might go through rough patches, you might have setbacks, but you've got a skill set that you can monetize, and that's worth more than any amount of money sitting in a bank account. Now, I want to talk about something that a lot of people get wrong when they're trying to build wealth in their 40s, and that's the investment side of things. See, there's this idea that building wealth requires you to be some kind of financial genius. You need to pick the right stocks. You need to time the market. You need to understand complex investment strategies. You need to have a sophisticated portfolio with different asset classes and all of this complicated stuff. And if you're not an expert, well, then you probably shouldn't even bother trying. That's complete nonsense. And it's one of the biggest reasons why people in their 40s haven't built wealth yet. They think they don't know enough to do it, so they don't do anything at all. Here's the reality. Building your first $100,000 requires almost no investment expertise, like almost zero. In fact, if you're trying to be clever with your investments, you're probably making things worse, not better. The best investment strategy for someone in their 40s who's trying to build their first $100,000 is shockingly boring. You take whatever extra money you've got and you put it into a low-cost index fund that tracks the entire stock market. That's it. You're done. You don't need to think about it. You don't need to pick individual stocks. You don't need to worry about which fund is best. Just pick a broad market index fund from a reputable company, set up automatic contributions, and let it sit. That's seriously all you need to do. The magic is that this strategy has beaten the vast majority of professional investors over long periods of time. The people with MBAs and fancy offices and research teams are trying to beat the market, and most of them can't. Meanwhile, you're just buying the whole market, and you're winning. It's beautiful, really. And it doesn't require any special knowledge or skills. A 5-year-old could understand this strategy. You're just saying, I believe that American businesses are generally going to do okay over the next decade, so I'm going to own a little piece of a lot of them. That's it. Let's talk about taxes for a minute, because this is another place where people in their 40s can gain a huge advantage if they know what they're doing. See, when you're building wealth, every dollar you can keep out of the IRS's hands is a dollar that can compound and grow instead. And there are actually legal ways to do this that most people completely ignore. If you're self-employed or you've got any kind of side income, you can open something called a solo 401k or a SEPIRA, and you can contribute a lot more money to it than you can to a regular IRA. Like, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars per year instead of just a few thousand. These are legal tools that the government actually wants you to use. They're designed to help people save for retirement. But most people just put money into taxable brokerage accounts instead because they don't know any better. And then they end up paying taxes on all of their investment gains every single year. You could be saving thousands of dollars per year in taxes just by putting your money in the right account. That's money that stays in your investment account, growing, instead of going to the government. If you're working a W-2 job, you should also be maxing out your 401k contributions if your employer offers one, because that money comes out before taxes. If you're making $80,000 and you contribute $10,000 to your 401k, you only pay taxes on $70,000. That's an immediate tax savings of around $2,000, assuming you're in the 22% tax bracket. And then that $10,000 goes into your investment account and starts growing. It's like getting an instant raise from the government just for using the account that was designed for exactly this purpose. Most people in their 40s are not doing this. They're contributing the minimum, or nothing at all. But if you're trying to build your first $100,000, you absolutely should be taking advantage of every tax-advantaged account available to you. It's free money, and you're just leaving it on the table if you don't. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. You're in your 40s. Your time horizon is different than someone in their 20s. You can't wait 30 years for your investments to compound. You need to see results in maybe 5, 10, 15 years maximum. So how does that change the strategy? Well, the good news is that it doesn't change it that much. See, the stock market has averaged about 10% per year over really long periods of time. Yes, there's volatility in the short term. Some years are great, some years are terrible. But over any 10-year period, you're almost always going to see positive returns. And 10 years might sound like a long time, but if you're in your mid-40s, you're probably going to be working for at least another 10 to 15 years anyway. So you're not really sacrificing that much time. You're just being patient while your money does the heavy lifting for you. Let me give you an example of what this might look like in the real world. Let's say you're 45 years old. You've got 15 years until you want to retire at 60. You've got a job that pays $80,000. You manage to find another $15,000 per year in side income. You take that $15,000 and you invest it. You also max out your 401k at your job, which means you're putting another $23,000 per year into that account. That's $38,000 per year going into retirement accounts. Now, that seems like a lot, and it might feel tight at first. But remember, the 401k money is coming out before taxes, so your take-home pay isn't actually dropping by that amount. Your real cost is probably somewhere around $25,000 per year after you account for the tax savings. That leaves you with $55,000 per year from your $80,000 salary to live on, plus whatever you're spending from your side income to cover your actual living expenses. Most people can live on that if they're being reasonable about it. Now, let's look at what happens over 15 years. You're investing $38,000 per year. That's $570,000 total that you're contributing. But that money is growing at an average of 8% per year. After 15 years, that money is going to be worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $900,000 to $1 million. You've hit your wealth-building goal without ever making a six-figure income. You've done it by being consistent and strategic. And here's the best part. Once you hit that 700 or 800,000 mark, your life starts to change in ways that you probably can't even imagine right now. Because now your investments are earning money for you. If you've got $800,000 invested at 8% per year, that's $64,000 per year that your money is earning without you having to do anything. That's basically an entire salary coming from your investments. Suddenly, you've got options. You could cut back your work. You could take time off. You could be more selective about what work you do. The monkey is off your back. But I want to make sure you understand something really important here. This strategy only works if you actually do it. And I mean that in the most obvious way possible. You have to actually invest the money. You have to actually earn the extra income. You have to actually stick with it, even when it's boring and even when you don't see results right away. This is where most people fail, and it's not because they don't understand the strategy. It's because they lack the discipline to follow through. They'll start strong for a few months. They'll get excited about the idea of building wealth. They'll set up the automatic investments. And then month 3 or 4 rolls around, and they don't see any dramatic changes. Their bank account doesn't look that different. Their life doesn't feel that different. And so they get discouraged, and they stop doing it. They go back to spending every dollar they make. They convince themselves that this strategy doesn't work, when the reality is that it wasn't working because they didn't stick with it long enough to see real results. This is why I want to talk about something that might sound a little unusual, but it's actually one of the most powerful things you can do to ensure that you follow through with this strategy. And that's creating a system that automates as much of this as possible. See, humans are not great at delayed gratification. We're really good at coming up with reasons why we should spend money today instead of saving it for some future version of ourselves that we don't even know yet. But if you set up your system so that the money moves automatically, so that you never actually see it in your checking account, then you don't have to rely on your willpower every single month. The money is just gone. It's invested. It's compounding. You don't have to think about it. This is why setting up automatic transfers from your paycheck to your investment account is so important. You don't decide every month whether to invest. You just set it up once, and then it happens automatically. The same principle applies to your side income. If you're building a freelance business or a side hustle, set aside a percentage of that money right from the beginning. Maybe it's 30%, maybe it's 50%. But decide on the percentage up front, and then automate the transfer. The money goes into your investment account before you ever have a chance to spend it. This removes all of the friction. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to discipline yourself. It just happens. And this is actually the real secret to building wealth. It's not about being smart or sophisticated. It's about creating systems that are so simple and automatic that they work even when your motivation fades away, which it will. Let me talk about something else that people in their 40s often deal with, and that's the guilt of not having started earlier. You're looking at the numbers and you're thinking, man, if I'd started this 10 years ago, I'd already have 300 grand by now. That thought is not helpful. In fact, it's actively destructive because it keeps you focused on the past instead of the future. You can't change the past. You can't change the fact that you didn't start saving seriously when you were 30. But you can change the future. You can start today. And if you start today and you're disciplined about it, you can still build a huge amount of wealth by the time you retire. Yes, if you'd started 10 years ago, you'd have more money. But you didn't. You're starting now. And starting now is infinitely better than starting never, which is what's going to happen if you sit around feeling guilty about the past. Here's what I want you to do right now. I want you to think about one area of your life where you could potentially earn more money. Could you do freelance work in your field? Could you start a small consulting business? Could you pick up a part-time job doing something that you're good at? Could you sell something online? Could you teach or mentor other people? There's 100 different ways to make extra income if you actually decide to do it. Pick one. Just one. Don't try to do 5 different things. That's a recipe for burnout. Pick one thing that you think you could actually do, something that plays to your strengths and your interests, and commit to trying it for 90 days. 90 days of actually putting in effort to build this extra income stream. If after 90 days you find that it's not working or you don't like it, you can stop and try something else. But most people who actually try will find that they can generate at least some extra income in 90 days. Maybe it's $1,000. Maybe it's $5,000. It doesn't have to be a lot. It just has to be something. Once you've got that extra income, that's when the real magic starts to happen. Because now you're going to take that money and you're going to invest it. And here's where you need to be disciplined, because this is the moment where most people mess up. They get excited about the extra income. They feel successful. And then they spend it on something they don't need. A new car, a vacation, an upgrade to their house. And all of that extra income just disappears. And they're back to square one. Don't do that. I'm not saying you can't ever use that extra money for something enjoyable, but you need to decide the rule up front. Maybe the rule is that 50% of your side income goes to investments and 50% you can spend however you want. Or maybe it's 70% and 30%. Whatever the split is, decide it before the money comes in and then stick to it. Because without that rule, you're going to sabotage yourself. Now, let's talk about something that a lot of people miss when they're building wealth in their 40s, and that's the emotional and psychological side of it. Because building wealth isn't just a numbers game, it's also about how you see yourself and how you move through the world. When you're someone who's building multiple income streams, when you're someone who's consistently investing money, when you're someone who's being strategic about your financial future, that changes how you carry yourself. It changes how you interact with other people. It changes what opportunities you notice and what opportunities you pursue. You start to see yourself as a wealth builder instead of just an employee. You start to see your skills and your knowledge as assets that have value instead of things that you're supposed to give away for a salary. And that shift in identity is what actually accelerates everything else. I've seen this happen countless times with people in their 40s and 50s who decide to really commit to building wealth. They start out thinking it's just about money, but what actually happens is that they become different people. They become more confident. They become more intentional about their choices. They start saying no to things that don't serve them and yes to things that do. They stop trying to impress people with stuff they can't afford. They stop caring about keeping up with the Joneses. And all of that happens not because they suddenly became enlightened or spiritual, but because they became focused on something that actually matters: their own financial security and freedom. When you're building real wealth, you don't have time to care about what other people think. You're too busy working on your own goals. Here's another thing that's really important, and this is something that a lot of people in their 40s don't think about until it's too late. Your earning years are limited. You've probably got maybe 20 years left where you're at peak earning capacity before you slow down or stop working completely. 20 years, that's it. It sounds like a lot, but it goes by fast. You've probably already lived 40 or 45 or 50 years. You know how fast time goes. Those next 20 years are going to go the same way, which is why you need to actually make a move now. Not next year, not when you've paid off your credit cards or when you've got more money saved up or when things settle down. Now. Because waiting is the thing that kills most people's wealth-building dreams. They keep thinking that eventually they're going to do it. Eventually they're going to start earning extra income. Eventually they're going to invest. But eventually never comes. And before they know it, they're 62 and they haven't built anything. And they're working in some job they hate because they don't have a choice. Let me tell you what your life could look like if you actually do this. Let's say you start today. You're 45. You commit to earning an extra $15,000 per year from side income. You also max out your 401k. You invest consistently. You don't get fancy with your investments. You just buy low-cost index funds and let them sit. 15 years go by. You're now 60. You've got somewhere in the neighborhood of $750,000 to $1 million in investments. Your investments are earning you 40 to 50 grand per year in returns. You no longer need to work. You can stop. You can retire. You can do whatever you want. You don't have to wait until you're 65 to get Social Security. You don't have to work until you drop. You've got options. You've got freedom. And that freedom is worth way more than any amount of money you can put in a bank account. Because freedom is what actually makes you happy. Freedom to choose how you spend your time. Freedom to be selective about work. Freedom to take time off whenever you want. Freedom to help your kids or grandkids without worrying about your own financial situation. That's what wealth actually buys you. But here's the thing. None of this is going to happen if you don't start. None of it. You can read 100 articles about wealth building. You can watch 1,000 videos. You can understand the concept perfectly. But if you don't actually take action, if you don't actually go out and find a way to earn extra income, if you don't actually set up your automatic investments, then nothing changes. You'll be in the same situation 5 years from now that you're in today, except you'll be 5 years older, and you'll have 5 years less time to build wealth. So the first step is taking action. The second step is staying consistent. That's it. That's the whole formula. It's not complicated. It's not sophisticated. It's just simple actions consistently applied over time. And that's the thing that builds real wealth. I want to give you one more piece of advice before we wrap this up. And this is something that people in their 40s really need to hear. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to cut your spending by 50%. You don't have to live like a monk. You don't have to sacrifice your quality of life to build wealth. You just have to be intentional. You just have to be willing to do things a little bit differently. You just have to be willing to focus on expanding your income instead of shrinking your expenses. Most people can do that. Most people can find a way to earn an extra $15,000 or $20,000 per year if they're willing to use their existing skills and knowledge. Most people can set up automatic investments and then just leave them alone. Most people can stay focused on their goal for 5 or 10 years if they understand what the payoff is going to be. You're not being asked to do anything superhuman here. You're just being asked to be more strategic and intentional than the average person. And that's not that hard. The difference between someone who builds $100,000 in the next 5 years and someone who doesn't isn't intelligence or luck or access to special opportunities. It's just commitment to a strategy and the willingness to follow through. That's it. You've got the intelligence. You've probably already proved that over the course of your career. You've dealt with challenges and overcome them. You've learned new skills. You've adapted to changes. If you can do all of that in your career, you can definitely do this. So the question isn't whether you can build your first $100,000. The question is whether you're going to decide to do it. And if the answer is yes, then you need to move on from thinking about it and start actually doing it. Pick one way to earn extra income. Set up your automatic investments. Check in once a year to make sure things are on track. And then just live your life and let the compounding do its thing. 5 years from now, you're going to be so glad you did. That was your friend Clarence Capital. Don't forget, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Check out the next video. Take care of yourself, your finances, and most importantly, your time. Good luck.